Hello, everyone. Welcome to week 3. I am so excited this week to talk to you about poetic lines and stanzas and music. Um, a lot of this is going to relate to what you noticed in your songs that you chose from week 1, and it's going to build on what we learned last week about imagery and figurative language. So, the first example poem that I want to start off with is called A Blessing, and it's by James Wright, who was an Ohio poet who was really famous for writing these beautiful poems about nature and the countryside and connecting with it. So he's a very well-known poet. This poem is in free verse. So that's one of our key terms for this week. So free verse means it is not in a prescribed form. It doesn't have a standard set of rhythm or rhymes, but the poet is making choices and decisions about where to break each line. So similar to when you pasted in your song lyrics in week 1, and you could see the song lyrics don't go all the way to the margin, right? They're actually broken up, right, into these little units. And so these are decisions that the poet's making. And I'll talk a little bit more about them after we look at this poem. But I want you to think about, as I'm reading it, how the line breaks can actually create surprise. Just like someone said in one of the songs they were analyzing, it sort of starts off one way, you think it's going to be one thing, and then you find out something else, right? As the lines keep going and you get more information. So this is A Blessing by James Wright. Just off the highway to Rochester, Minnesota, twilight bounds softly forth on the grass, and the eyes of those 2 Indian ponies darken with kindness. They have come out of the willows to welcome my friend and me. We step over the barbed wire into the pasture where they have been grazing all day alone. They ripple tensely. They can hardly contain their happiness that we have come. They bow shyly as wet swans. They love each other. There is no loneliness like theirs. At home once more, they begin munching the young tufts of spring in the darkness. I would like to hold the slenderer one in my arms, for she has walked over to me and nuzzled my left hand. She is black and white, her mane falls wild on her forehead, and the light breeze moves me to caress her long ear that is delicate as the skin over a girl's wrist. Suddenly, I realize that if I stepped out of my body, I would break into blossom. Beautiful poem. So you'll notice that there is specific details and imagery, as we talked about in week 1. We know where we're at. We're in Rochester, Minnesota. There's 2 Indian ponies. There's barbed wire. One of them is black and white. We get the description of the wild mane, and also some figurative language, right? There's willows there, so that's a specific tree. And they bow shyly as wet swans. They're not swans, but something graceful, right? And beautiful in the way that they bend their necks reminds the poet of swans. And the ear of the one horse that the poet touches, right, and feels is as delicate as the skin over a girl's wrist. So it's that just really thin, tender, right, kind of a touch. The other thing I want you to notice in this poem that we're talking about this week is the line breaks. So I want to look at 2 in particular to show you what I mean. Here towards the middle of the poem, they ripple tensely. They can hardly contain their happiness. That sentence could end there, but it doesn't. It's enjambed, which is one of our other key terms for this week, which means it runs over into the next line. So we get a complete thought. They ripple tensely. They can hardly contain their happiness. And then we find out in the next line that we have come. It's not just their happiness being outside in the twilight, munching the delicious grass. It's their happiness to have some human company, right, as the poet interprets it. So that's what a jammed line can do, right? You'll notice that there are some end stopped lines where they have been grazing all day alone, period. So an end stopped line ends with that complete thought, a final mark of punctuation, period, exclamation point, question mark. We also have in here a caesura, so I'll just point that out. That's a period in the middle of the line. So they bow shyly as wet swans. They love each other. Having a pause in the middle of the line just affects the rhythm. It's another choice, right, that the poet's making. Free verse poets, I think, honestly, have a harder job sometimes than formal poets because they have to make every single decision about the line breaks. Whereas a formal poet, some of that's already decided for you, right? And you're filling in the container. So ironically, I think having the more freedom can be more challenging. It's like, imagine if we didn't have roadsides and traffic lights and all those traffic signals we agree to, we'd be having to decide constantly, is it my turn to go? Is it your turn? Should I drive on this side of the road or that side of the road? Right. So there's some comfort, right, in having some sort of rules and regulations, if you will. The other line that I wanted to discuss with you briefly is this final two lines. And these are sort of the killer lines of the poem, and also really work heavily with the enjambment, or the sentence flowing over into the next line. So suddenly I realize, we don't know what he's realized yet, it's enjambed, that if I stepped out of my body, I would break. Now it could end there. That's a complete thought. And I could think, oh no, break, like you'd disintegrate, right? Or you'd die. I mean, it sounds like it could be something really bad to break, to be a broken person, right? But suddenly I realized that if I stepped out of my body, I would break into blossom. So he's not talking about breaking in a bad way, like a Humpty Dumpty, right, kind of breaking, but breaking into blossom, right? Going from that potential of a flower into that full flower. So of course that's also figurative because he's not going to break into blossom. That would be really strange, right? But he's saying, like, I'm sort of blossoming maybe emotionally, right? Or with love for these animals, right, in this scene. Also want to mention one of our other keywords for this week is consonants. So consonants is a sound term, and it means when the consonants in words are the same so that they sound good together. In this case, we have alliteration specifically, but consonants doesn't have to happen just at the beginning of the words like alliteration. It could be anywhere in the word. At the end of these lines, end of this poem, we have body, break, and blossom, all start with that B sound, right? So consonants, and again, in this case, specifically alliteration, but it's the consonants that are the same that also make it sound good and kind of maybe bring a sense of closure to the end of the poem because we hear that, or whether we consciously register it or not. Okay, second poem I want to share is another free verse poem. Looks very different though, so this is so exciting. I want to share this so you can see it. This is a poem by the poet Kate Light, who was an amazing person. I did get to meet her. She was a accomplished modern dancer. Like, she danced in a actual professional dance troupe. She was also a violinist in a New York symphony, and she was an amazing poet. She was sort of a Renaissance woman. She just was an amazing person to me. So this poem of hers, which I love, is called Greg's Legs. Oh my gosh. So we have a true rhyme already in the title. So true rhyme is one of our, or exact rhyme is one of our other keywords for this week, which means probably what you think of when you think of rhyme. The initial consonant sounds are different, but the rest of the word is the same. So Greg's legs both have eggs right in there. So that might give us a clue for a couple things about the poem. First, before we even read it, you can see this is kind of unusual. It's in two really long, skinny stanzas, kind of like legs, right? Two legs, like standing there on the page. This is also called a concrete poem. I didn't put that as one of our words for this week, but concrete poem just means a poem that looks like whatever it's talking about. This is a clever one. So we've got two long, skinny stanzas that she has intentionally made this way to look like Greg's legs. So this is another free verse poem. It's a really intense poem for sound. And stanzas is another one of our words for this week. So stanzas means where the poem, it's kind of like a paragraph in prose where the poem breaks visually. And this has two that are parallel. Usually they're not parallel. We'll see in our next poem. They're usually vertical on the page. But these ones are parallel or horizontal. Okay, so I'll read Greg's legs and you can listen for the sounds, wonderful sounds in this poem. Greg's legs are long, strong exhalations of bone and soft fur draped all over her, unless he is alone, in which case erase all thought of draped. They're not, but laid, splayed, or folded to rest in a nest of down and cotton. She's gotten attached to those thatched legs of Greg's. No explanations, confessions, or commentary required by her. On the contrary, she's never tired of the extremely long femur and the thigh rising high to hook in the nook of pelvic socket. And what of her love for the pocket at the other end, the bend above the clavicle, where the hollow dips could store paper clips in some radical yet ancient design? Or her penchant for the line of spine, or running down the crown, or going to town on feeling everything. So it's a humorous ending, right? But this is written by someone who loves Greg, right? And is really sort of praising Greg's physical attributes, right? So really a fun poem. So you can see that there is rhyme throughout this. Oh my gosh, we've got strong, long, fur, her, bone, alone, case, erase, even draped in there a little bit, laid, splayed, etc. Okay, rest, nest. So we have our true or exact rhymes, and we also have maybe some slant rhymes. So slant rhymes are rhymes where there are multiple sounds in the words that are the same. So they're really close to rhymes, but they don't exactly rhyme. I think I just saw one, which was, I lost it now. But they're real. I gave you some examples in our vocabulary words for this week. And then there's also some assonance in this. So consonants is when the consonant sounds are the same, and assonance is when the vowel sounds are the same. So like case and draped, or erase and draped, both have the A sound in the middle. That's the vowel sound. So the sounds we get from A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes Y, right, in our English language are the same. Notice that spelling, unfortunately, in English doesn't really always give us the clue of whether something rhymes or not. You have to actually say it or hear it out loud to find it. So I would say poems you are really interested in this week and you choose, read them out loud to yourself, right? That would be a great thing to do. So really intense sound, and this is a really fun poem in the sense of playing with this idea of putting it in the two skinny stanzas, right, of Greg's legs. And notice there's some really beautiful rhymes in here that are, if you have rhymes that are more unusual, not just like moon, June, right, and things that we're used to, like pocket and socket, not one I would have thought about. Hollow dips and paper clips, right? I was like, never expect to see paper clips in this poem, so it's kind of fun. A clavicle, so that's this bone up here, right, in our bodies, and radical. That's actually a great example of a slant rhyme or a near rhyme. It's not exactly right, but it has so much in common, clavicle and radical, that we hear it as pretty much right, almost a rhyme. Yeah, so really cool poem, Greg's Legs. I think that's everything I wanted to say about that one. And then the final example that we're going to look at is a formal poem. That's one of our other words for this week. And a formal poem, unlike a free verse poem, has a set rhythm and rhyme scheme that it's going to fulfill. So one you're probably used to is a sonnet. And you probably know it's 14 lines. An English sonnet has a different rhyme scheme than an Italian sonnet, but they both have a set rhyme scheme. And they have a set line length, right? They have 10 syllables per line, etc. We're not going to talk about sonnets, but we're going to look at a different form. This is a French form called a villanelle. I really love this form. It's a tricky form, but it's a very beautiful form, and has something in common with the songs that you picked in week 1, in that the villanelle has 2 refrains. So it has 2 lines that repeat, and they're set up in the first stanza. We'll see this, and then they alternate in the next 4 stanzas, and then they come together, kind of a clincher at the end of the poem. So the tricky part with this, you can think about this, if you're writing something where something repeats, right, a lot, and just like in a song, you don't want it to feel boring. You don't want to get stuck, right? Say, let's say, why are we hearing this again, right? So you have to have some momentum, some way to move the poem forward. And sometimes that's with the kind of narrative of what's happening in the poem. Sometimes it's by just slightly changing and tweaking the repeated parts as you go. I thought about in Jimmy Buffett's song Margaritaville, which I'm sure everybody's familiar with. There's a line that repeats that changes slightly over the course of the poem and really shows us the singer, the person singing, right, coming to terms with some deep truths about their life. So the first time he sings the line, he says, "I know it's somebody's fault." And the second time he sings it, "And I know it's all you women's fault," right? So blaming somebody else, specifically women. And then he ends with, "And I know it's my own damn fault." So by the end of the song, he's actually accepted responsibility. That's what I mean by it's the same line, really, because it's all about the fault and whose fault it is, but it gets changed each time. And so we see this person working through, right, some kind of acceptance, right, of their own responsibility. Okay, so let's look at one art, and this is by Elizabeth Bishop. This is the same American poet who wrote The Fish that you looked at last week. And you'll see the 2 repeating lines are set up in the first stanza. "The art of losing isn't hard to master, and to be lost, that their loss is no disaster." Those are the 2 lines we're going to look for that keep repeating, and notice what happens to them over the course of the poem. The other thing about the villanelle is that the middle lines, so the second line that ends with intent, those rhyme throughout the poem. So as I said, it's very complicated, but when it's successful, it's so beautiful. So this is One Art by Elizabeth Bishop. "The art of losing isn't hard to master. So many things seem filled with the intent to be lost, that their loss is no disaster. Lose something every day. Accept the fluster of lost door keys, the hour badly spent. The art of losing isn't hard to master. Then practice losing farther, losing faster. Places and names and where it was you meant to travel, none of these will bring disaster. I lost my mother's watch, and look, my last or next to last of 3 loved houses went. The art of losing isn't hard to master. I lost 2 cities, lovely ones, and vaster some realms I owned, 2 rivers, a continent. I miss them, but it wasn't a disaster. Even losing you, the joking voice, a gesture I love, I shan't have lied. It's evident the art of losing's not too hard to master, though it may look like, write it, like disaster." Okay, so let's look at how this poem kind of unfolds. So the premise is the art of losing isn't hard to master. And I think all of us have lost things, people, right, over time. So we know that this is a human experience. And she says, like, so many things seem to want to be lost, right? That, it's just, we just have to accept it, right? And not attribute too much significance to it. It's not a disaster. You can lose something every day. So we lose our door keys, maybe multiple times, right, per week. We look up from our phone and say, where did the hour go? So the hour badly spent. Art of losing, right, isn't hard to do. She gives us these examples. These are really small things. Door keys and 1 hour, right, in the grand scheme of things is small. And then practice losing farther, losing faster. So now it's gaining some kind of momentum here. So not just door keys or a small amount of time, but places, names. You can't remember names of people you knew maybe years ago. Who was your 5th grade teacher? I don't know. And where it was you meant to travel. So you had these plans and you never realized them. And now you don't even remember what were your dreams and plans, right, from long ago. And she says, even though we're getting bigger, these are bigger things, still none of these will bring disaster. Then she talks about some things that are very dear to her. So my mother's watch, it's not just like the door keys, which you need them to open the door, but they're not sentimental. We're not usually emotionally attached, right, to our door keys the way we are to a mother's watch or ring or bracelet, right, or a father's tool box, right, or something that he left behind that is, has memories and emotions and feelings attached to it. So we're getting even more to the heart of things here. So my mother's watch and houses, like whole houses that she's moved away from, you can't go back to them. My husband's house, for example, his childhood house, we went to go look at it. It was torn down, right? It was a vacant lot. So it's only in his memory, right? You can't go back and even look at those same walls again. And she says, but still, like the art of losing isn't hard to master. These things do happen to us. Then it gets even bigger. So we've gone from houses to I lost 2 cities, lovely ones. I don't return to those places. And vast are some realms I own, 2 rivers, a continent. She had lived in Brazil for a time, so she's saying, I'm not going back to Brazil, like that time of my life is over. And then it changes a little bit, right? I miss them, but it wasn't a disaster. That's admitting a little bit more of the problem instead of just saying, oh, none of these will bring disaster, right? It's not a disaster. Just saying, well, I do miss them. It does paying on my heart a little bit, but it wasn't a disaster. Then we get to the absolute maximum kind of loss, which is losing another person, right? And I think, a lot of you wrote about grandparents, right? And things like this in your song discussion. So I know you understand this. So even losing you, and then she describes the person a little bit, the joking voice, a gesture I love, I shan't have lied. It's evident the art of losing is not too hard to master. Of course, we do lose people to death or illness, right? And we lose people, they break up with us, right? Or our friends move away, right? Those things happen. And then she says, though it may look write it, like disaster. So first she admits it might look like disaster. And then in that parentheses where she's saying, write it, she's talking to herself. So the poet's saying, having to force herself to write, it might look like disaster. And she has to force herself to do it because really it is a disaster. So just like in the Jimmy Buffett song at the end, when he has to admit, actually, it's my own damn fault, right? It's not somebody else and all you women, it's really me, right? Who's the problem? Here she admits that, okay, I liked to pretend that I was too cool, right? To really feel deeply, right, the loss of all these things. But when I really get cut down to the bone and I'm losing a person that I love, I have to admit it really does look like and feel like a disaster, right? So you can see how this kind of unfolds. So if we look at the rhymes, and I never met Elizabeth Bishop. She was passed away before my time, but one of her students, Frank Bedart, another poet, was my teacher. And he said when she was writing this poem, and he was her student and her friend, she was asking people for, oh, help me find rhymes for, master disaster. And she was making a list, right, so that she could have a lot of choices, right, options to use in this poem. So if you think about that, it's kind of a fun game in a sense to collect these rhymes and then see what you can do with them. So we have master, disaster, fluster. That's a slant rhyme, right? But see how it actually can be fun to have some slant rhymes in there, and it can be not so Hallmark card like or hit so hard if you vary it a little bit, right, with the slant rhyme. So fluster and master, not exact, but they're very close, right? We have faster, disaster, last or. I like that, bit of a slant rhyme, and she's taking 2 words and rhyming them with the master, right? Vaster, that's an exact rhyme with faster, vaster. And then gesture, slant rhyme, right? Gesture is a little bit different from master and disaster. Then let's look at the middle lines because all of those need to rhyme in a villanelle. So we have intent, spent, meant, went, continent, right? So it's a longer word, but the very end of it does rhyme. Evident, right? So all these words that end with "ent." So I would say evident and continent are not as exact as meant and went, which are both the same, same syllable length, and just that one sound different. But you can see how they do go together. So what I want you to think about this week when you're looking at, you do have 2 villanelles that you're looking at in your possible poems that you're looking at is, since you know now how a villanelle is built around these two refrains that are set up in the beginning, then they alternate at the end of the next four stanzas, then they come together like a clincher at the end. Do they stay exactly the same? Do they vary some? How does the poem, build or change by the end to keep us kind of engaged and to bring us somewhere? Just like Jimmy Buffett carries us from the denial, right, that anything in the person singing the song's life could possibly be their fault, to the admission that it's their fault, or like in Elizabeth Bishop, from the insistence that losing things is not a disaster, to the end admitting that actually, yeah, there are times when you lose something and it really is a disaster and a heartbreak. So this week you're looking at both line breaks, stanza breaks, and form, and then making some comments about that. That remind me, I want to say another quick thing about stanza. So the stanzas in this villanelle, the stanzas are prescribed. So the stanzas are already a formula, right, that you have to fill. So there's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 3-line stanzas, and then one 4-line stanza at the end. But this is the stanza break. You can see the blank line. That's how you know you're starting a new stanza normally. Okay, thanks so much, everybody. I hope you have a great week and you enjoy the poems for this week and read them out loud. Here's some of the sounds. I think it would be a great thing to do.